3 terrifying true spring horror stories that will haunt your dreams forever. I never should have opened that door. The moment my hand touched the doorknob, a chill crept down my spine, lingering there like a whisper I couldn't quite make out. My heart raced, thudding against my ribs as I stood in my dimly lit hallway, the air thick with an unseen weight. It was one of those spring evenings when life bursts forth everywhere, but in that moment, all I could feel was dread, a gnawing certainty that something was waiting on the other side. Why routine had been simple. Dinner, a movie, a quiet evening. But then, I heard a low hum, like the flickering of lights in an empty room. I paused, straining to listen. The house felt cold, too cold for a spring night. Shadows danced in the corners where the light couldn't reach, twisting and contorting into shapes that made my pulse quicken. The whispers returned, more urgent now, scratching at the back of my mind. Just check it out, I muttered to myself, trying to sound brave. But my voice felt small, swallowed by the noise around me. Every creak of the floorboards beneath my feet felt magnified, an echo of my own fear. I could smell something sweet, a cloying scent that reminded me of rot, yet there was no source. It hung heavy, wrapping around me like a fog. Then there were sounds soft, almost playful, and yet laced with something sinister. It was as if the very walls were alive, murmuring secrets. I took a step back, my breath hitching as a shadow flickered past the doorway in my periphery. I could hear my own heartbeat, thumping in my ears like a warning bell. What was that? I gasped, the voice trembling in the cold air. The darkness felt heavier now, clinging to me like a shroud. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from behind me, sending me spinning around. No one was there. Just silence, and that stench. I was sure it was coming from the door. My hands shook as I reached for the knob again, drawn in by something I couldn't resist. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was desperation. With a twist, I flung the door open, and the world on the other side was utterly unrecognizable. The shadows thickened, swirling like smoke, and a figure loomed just beyond the threshold. I barely had a chance to scream before the door slammed shut. My heart raced, panic flooding every inch of me like ice water. What was out there? I needed answers, but all I could hear was an unnatural silence waiting. Hey, before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon. And while you're there, smash that like button, it really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. The air shifted, thickening with an electrifying tension that made every hair on my body stand on end. Heart pounding, I pressed my ear against the door, straining to hear whatever lay just beyond its facade. Silence fell heavier upon me, oppressive and stifling. I took a step back, forcing myself to breathe, each gasp an unsteady reminder that I was still tethered to this world, at least for now. I glanced around my darkened hallway, shadows leering at me from every corner, watching, waiting. The hum returned, this time sharper, like a call from deep within the bowels of the house itself. It seemed to pull me in, twisting my thoughts around like threads of smoke in the air. My mind raced with questions, each unanswered one clawed at me more fiercely than the last. What had I unleashed by opening that door? What lingered just out of sight? As I stood there, rooted in place, an unholy whimper resounded from behind me. It pierced through the silence, shrill and pained. I spun around, eyes darting, sickly dread pooling in my stomach as I searched for the source. No longer was it just the house being unsettling, the very air felt charged, as if something were watching me with hungry anticipation. I willed myself to move, but my limbs felt heavy, weighed down by an unseen force. Then I heard it, a low, guttural snarl slicing through the tension like razors through flesh. I was not alone. It was closer now, creeping around me, weaving through the shadows and dancing along the walls. The whispers grew frenzied, tearing at the edges of my sanity, swirling words I couldn't comprehend. phrases that tugged on the very fabric of reality. "Get out," they murmured, and the sound vibrated in my bones. Panicking, I stumbled backward, colliding with the door I had just closed. Without thinking, I pressed down on the knob, mortified by the realization that the door was once again locked tight, as if it had a will of its own. My heart raced as I pounded my fist against it, desperate for an escape. "Let me out!" I cried, the echo of my voice a feeble protest against the encroaching darkness. Suddenly, the air rippled, and a frigid breeze shot through the cracks, whipping against my face like icy fingers. From the abyss, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the door handle, a wild, terrified visage staring back at me, surrounded by a swirling maelstrom of shadows. But it wasn't just my own face that sent chills through me, something else lurked behind, something twisted and vile, with hollow eyes that glinted maliciously in the trailing light of that accursed hallway. That I stumbled back in horror, my breath hitching, only to find myself inexplicably back in the center of the dark hallway that now stretched endlessly in every direction. Then the whispers broke, a cacophony of voices wailing my name, an echo of sorrow that twisted my insides with despair. "Help us!" Racked with fear, I turned, desperately seeking the source, when a shadow detached itself from the wall, rushing towards me with blinding speed. My legs moved before my mind could catch up, and I sprinted down the corridor, deeper into the house, as if that could somehow shield me from the terror pursuing me. As I fled, I glanced back just in time to see a lurching figure tearing through the darkness, its ghastly face emerging, twisted in agony yet etched with a want for vengeance. It was trailing fingers that stretched impossibly long, reaching for me, clawing through the thin veil of reality. The floor beneath my feet heaved as if alive, and a deafening crack echoed from somewhere above. Just as I thought I'd found a moment of reprieve near a door ajar at the far end of the hallway, the lights blinked out. Darkness engulfed me completely. Somewhere, I could still hear the whispers booming through the silence, telling tales of lost souls and unending torment. And then all at once the wretched cries ceased, leaving behind a suffocating void. Instinctively, I turned back to the hallway. The figure had vanished, but a sense of finality loomed. There was something I had not grasped, some trap laid before me that I couldn't see. The door at the end of the corridor creaked open on its own, decidedly inviting. My heart raced at the thought of escape, but deep down, something gnawed at me, a realization that whatever waited beyond might be far worse than what I had just evaded. Compelled by a strange, unyielding need, I stepped toward the light flooding through the door, feeling the weight of dread lift momentarily as I crossed the threshold, only to be met by the reflection of my own terrified face staring back at me from the smooth glass. But this time, it wasn't me anymore. It wore a sickly grin, and the eyes that gazed at me were not my own. Then, from behind me, came a whisper that chilled my essence to the marrow. "You shouldn't have come here." Before I could react, the door slammed shut, plunging me into a deeper darkness, and the last thing I heard was a chorus of laughter mingling with the sound of a tide pulling back from the shore, leaving nothing but a hollow echo of what once was. My heart sank into a pit of despair as the laughter faded into a deep silence, swallowing me whole. I instinctively pressed my palms against the smooth surface of the door behind me, praying it would yield to my grasp, but it felt like stone, immovable and unforgiving. Panicking, I swung around to face the dark room, the suffocating weight of the shadows pressing in on me like a vice. There was a faint, ominous glow illuminating the edges of the room, barely touching the corners. I was ensnared in a suffocating gloom, the walls closing in as if they were breathing. The air felt sticky, reeking of rot and decay, as my pulse quickened in time with the rustling whispers growing ever louder. They emerged from the very fabric of the dark, echoing my torment, a chorus of disembodied voices swirling like a storm around me. Help us, they pleaded, each voice distinct yet overlapping, layering upon one another, creating an unsettling melody of desperation that echoed in my mind. But all I could focus on was the growing sense of dread that threaded through me. I flexed my fingers, trying to ground myself, and glanced around, desperate to discern shapes in the dark. It felt like an eternity before a figure materialized from the surrounding shadows, a silhouette lingering just at the edge of the half-light. As I squinted, the figure stepped closer, revealing itself to be a child, no more than 7 or 8, with ashen skin and hollow eyes that reflected a deep well of sorrow. "Mommy!" The child cried softly, voice broken, as if it trembled on the brink of shedding tears. My heart jolted, I barely mustered the courage to step forward. "What happened to you?" I whispered, uncertain if I truly wanted to know. The child's gaze shifted, full of a sorrow that went beyond comprehension. "They took me," it cried, a shuddering wail mingled with a sweet innocence that curdled my stomach. "They won't let me go. You need to help me." Bile rose in my throat. I could feel something sinister lurking, just beyond perception. I looked around, seeking a route, but the darkness twisted the very fabric of reality, warping the space around me until it felt like an inescapable labyrinth. "Where are you?" I choked out, my voice trembling with uncertainty. "Trapped just like the others," the child's voice echoed, and suddenly the shadows danced, flickering restlessly. A whirlwind of forms began to take shape in the darkness, and from every corner, anguished faces began to materialize, disfigured and lost, reaching out with bony fingers, mouths stretched wide in silent screams. The walls pulsed with their torment, drowning out the whimpering child's voice. "You can't leave, you must stay," they howled, their words tumbling over each other like a thrumming heartbeat, each pulse drumming into my skull, warping my thoughts, smothering the last vestiges of hope. That I stumbled back, my breathing quickening. A faint, luminescent path glimmered before me, leading deeper into the room. Compelled by desperation, I dashed toward it, not caring who I might leave behind. But the instant I moved, the collective voices surged, filling the air with a frenzied cacophony, threatening to pull me back into their nightmare. "Help us! Stay with us!" they shouted, their cries echoing through the suffocating gloom, becoming a desperate chorus that threatened to drown me. As I reached the disappearing light, it flickered violently, threatening to extinguish before my very eyes. I lunged toward it, a final attempt at salvation, yet just before I made contact, a dark figure emerged from the depths of shadows, hovering before the light, enigmatic yet all-consuming. It was tall and cloaked, the outline indistinguishable amid the chaos. A fractured voice emanated from it, rasping my name, reverberating through the walls and into my very bones. "You think you can escape? You can't run." Each word hung heavy in the air, filled with malice, and my heart sank within my chest. Before I could process it, the light was snuffed out, plunging me back into a darkness so profound it felt as though it reached into my soul. In that moment, I felt the cold presence encircle me, and a deep, chilling laughter echoed through the abyss, resonating with the cries of those endlessly trapped. The shadows surged forward, an insatiable tide, engulfing me in a swirling mass of voices. As the darkness closed in, I felt fingers clawing at my clothes, pulling me back, deeper into despair. The last thing I saw was the face of the hollow-eyed child, anguished, desperate, and utterly hopeless as it vanished into the enveloping void, and just as I thought I would succumb to the darkness, a blinding light exploded in the distance, seeming impossibly far. I was torn between the abyss behind me and the gleam of salvation ahead. Which would claim me? And then came that voice again, sharp and clear, chilly with malevolence, ringing in my ears like a death knell. "You've made your choice, and now you will pay the price." In an instant, the shadows pressed in with a violent force, and I was left hanging at the precipice of oblivion, crying out into the nothingness. The abyss wrapped around me like a shroud, each heartbeat pulling me away from the blinding light ahead. I felt as though I was being torn between two worlds, the very fabric of my existence quaking in the grasp of that malevolent force pressing behind me. The coldness of the dark began seeping through my skin, creeping inexorably into my bones. I let out a strangled gasp, grasping for the light, but the distance felt infinite, each pulse of despair dragging me back, sinking me deeper into the void. "Help us, help us!" The ghostly cries echoed louder, harmonizing into a symphony of woe that rattled my mind, each syllable suffused with anguish. As I strained to break free from their grasp, I could see their faces more clearly, the disfigured, the lost, all twined together in a grotesque tapestry of sorrow. Their eyes were hollow, their expressions twisted in eternal cries for help that could not escape their lips. "Come back!" They lunged for me, spectral hands stretching impossibly far, brushing against my skin, leaving trails of agony in their wake. The child's silhouette danced in and out of view, gesturing towards the light, then disappearing back into the thrumming darkness with every undulating surge of the shadows. It happened without warning. The gloomy aura pulsated, and the wall I had thought immutable rippled as if alive. Something behind that surface stirred a dreadful presence clawing to break through. I turned, desperation flooding through my veins. Then, as if responding to my fear, the ground beneath me shook violently, and a crack spidered across the wall before my eyes, revealing an oily blackness seeping forth, tendrils grasping hungrily at the air. Whispered then, a sibilant voice riding the waves of dread, "Your friends are waiting. They're coming for you too." The words slithered into my head, prickling my skin with dread. Friends? Who were they, any of them but chaotic echoes of anguish living in this nightmarish realm? And why were they waiting for me like a feast? The shadows breached the crack, pouring into the room like ink spilled on parchment, thick and suffocating. I staggered back as phantoms emerged from the inky depths, faces morphing from those who begged for mercy to figures I recognized, friends and family, their eyes wide with terror, mouths twisted into silent screams. "Help us!" they cried out in unison, the chorus curling around me like a serpent, tightening with each heartbeat. "You did this to us. You left us behind, no." I screamed, collapsing to the floor, my hands clawing at my head in a futile attempt to shut out their wails. "I never wanted this. I would never abandon you." Yet, in the swell of despair, doubt began to sink its talons into my heart, gnawing away at the remnants of my conviction. I locked eyes with one of the facetious friend long gone, her visage shattered and marred, still somehow familiar. She reached out, a spectral hand trembling as it hovered before me, beckoning and fearing all at once. "You must choose, or they will consume you, too." How could I choose? The light flickered behind me, struggling against the onslaught of shadows closing in. I could feel the icy grip of despair wrapping around my throat, squeezing tighter as time unraveled. "Help us." The voices melded into a soul-rending crescendo, absurdly haunting against the silken blackness that enveloped them. The walls of my reality warped, and I could hear promises of power, freedom, and reunion whispered to me from within the abyssal depths. "Join us," they urged, their voices a blend of seduction and anguish. "Become one with us, live forever in our memory, never alone in the dark." The sensation of familiarity was maddening, part of me longed to reach back, to grasp that outstretched hand. But as their presence surged forth, I caught a glimpse of vast darkness, a yawning maw that hungered for my very soul. As I struggled beneath their thrall, the child's voice broke through the noise like a fragile whisper on a desperate wind. "You have to fight. Don't believe them." In that breath of clarity, I seized the moment. Summoning every ounce of strength, I hurled my body toward the shivering light, but something struck me, a force like iron chains, binding me to the ground. I screamed, contorted in a violent struggle, as whispers turned into shouts. Me friends, my family, and the lost souls in the darkness pressed in, their outstretched fingers grazing my skin as they shared a singular, horrific secret: stay or lose everyone forever. The light flickered and dimmed, a heartbeat away from snuffing out completely. Suddenly, my surroundings grew chaotic, walls cracked and collapsed, clawing at the air like the dead reaching for life itself. And then, amidst the cacophony, the child spoke with a voice now cold as ice: "Make your choice. Or they will take you as they took you." In that harrowing second, the ground shifted beneath me, and as fragments of the floor began to crumble away into the shadows, I realized with paralyzing horror that my time was running out. The dark pit opened wide, the faces of the damned lit by a ghastly luminescence reaching for me. In a final, desperate motion, I lunged towards that flickering light, but the darkness surged and enveloped me completely. Just as I felt my grip slip, the cold thin fingers of ghosts entwined around my wrist, clenched tighter than a vice, dragging at my very spirit. I screamed, my voice lost in the wailing darkness, just as the light vanished altogether. The void swallowed me whole, and all that remained were their whispers, trailing off into quiet dread, leaving me to grapple with the chilling realization that my choice was perhaps never mine to make. And then, as I plummeted through the endless night, I saw a child's wide, hollow stare watching me from the edge of the despair, and then I lost everything but the echo of that laugh, the very sound of my own terror reverberating back at me as the darkness closed in like a sepulchre. I hovered somewhere between consciousness and a waking nightmare, a dreamscape melded with the unease of my reality. The borders of my awareness twisted, light flickered weakly, an ephemeral glimmer through thick curtains of shadow, each pulse resonating through the marrow of my bones. I gasped for breath, but the air felt crushed under the weight of despair, seeping with the scent of decay and echoes of my own terror. Help us please. The faint moans drifted like whispers from the dying wind, lacing through the darkness that closed in around me. I tried to focus on the outlines forming in the dimness until finally, faces emerged, tortured visages of the lost, intermingled with the specters of my past. Their expressions were grotesque, mouths gaping in silent screams betrayed by the twist of their features, contorted with anguish that mirrored my own. The child appeared amongst them, her form flickering like an old film reel, ethereal yet disconcertingly real. Wide eyes locked onto mine, and when she spoke, her voice hung heavy in the air. You didn't listen. You're not free yet. I could sense urgency in her tone, as though she held the key to escaping this hell but feared to deliver it. Before I could respond, the specters surged forward, enveloping me in a dense press of cold air and torment. I could feel their spectral fingers brushing against my skin, a chorus of remorseful laments flooding my mind. We are here, we are waiting, this is your home now, they chorused, each syllable sending ice through my veins. No. I screamed, the sound reverberating in my chest. I clawed at the darkness, struggling to pull free from their grasp, yet the shadows tightened like inevitable chains. I don't belong to you, every choice has a consequence, a voice echoed through the haze, chilling my heart, the voice of someone I once loved, lost to time and circumstance. You chose to turn your back when it mattered most. Now share in our fate. That I recoiled at the accusation, but the truth gnawed at me with relentless hunger. The haunting memories of betrayal washed over me like an avalanche, and their weight threatened to drown me. I should have fought harder, reached out, but I hadn't. Instead, I stood frozen, paralyzed by my own failures. A low rumble echoed in the distance, a resonance that pulled my gaze toward the foreboding void. The shadows contorted and twisted, coalescing into a large, swirling mass, and as it drew closer, I recognized the shapes, more lost souls grappling with their own anguish, their faces bereft of hope or salvation. They stared at me, a multitude of desperate, pleading eyes, forcing me to face a truth buried deep within my heart. I was not just a participant in this horror, I was the architect of my own despair. As I pulled myself upright, the child screamed, you must break free. If you let them pull you down, you won't just be lost, you'll become like them, trapped forever. Her warning resonated within me, but the overwhelming pull of the shadows wrapped around my mind, dark whispers intoxicating with promises of freedom mingled with horrifying truths. My heart thundered as I clenched my fists, willing my willpower to surface, cradling a fierce desperation. In that shocking realization, I opened my mouth, intending to scream against the tide of darkness clawing at my soul. I won't lose myself. I refuse. But even as the words left my lips, laughter erupted around, mimicking, taunting, a cacophony that crescendoed into a feverish roar. Such sweet defiance. Let her struggle, it will only make her fate more delicious. The patrons of the shadows reveled in their unholy dance, swirling around me like a tempest of shadows, eager to consume the light that flickered inside. Summoning every ounce of defiance, I forced myself toward the child, her presence a beacon within the chaos. What do I do? How can I escape this? Turn your back on the pain, face your truth, she urged, but her eyes were wide with fear of what lay behind that greenlit facade. Clenching my jaw, I turned away from the writhing specters clawing at my consciousness, focusing on the dim light, the faint promise of a way out. As I pressed ahead, the grip around me tightened like a vice, the whispers echoing dread into my core. If you leave us, you will never know peace. We will haunt you forever. You will always remember us. I felt my resolve cracking, splintering at the edges under the weight of the phantom sorrow. The ground quaked beneath, vibrating with their despair, and the mirrored faces of those I had lost rippled across the shadows, distorting into such raw anguish that I feared I would shatter, but I would not falter. I would not succumb. I had to keep moving. Just then, the child cried out, they won't let you leave. You must make your choice now. Before I could process her words, the ground beneath my feet buckled, and she grasped my arm tightly. Don't look back. She screamed, but at that moment, I heard a crushing weight shift behind me, and instinct overtook my senses. I turned. I had to. There, bathed in a grotesque glow, stood a gaping void, wider than any fear I had ever known, revealing the tortured souls that clamored for my attention, their bodies racked in twisted agony. In the forefront, I saw their mournful eyes watching me with an icy anticipation, an unspeakable hunger in their gnawing whispers. Join us. As I teetered on the precipice between right and wrong, light and dark, I understood the truth. I could either surrender to their call or confront my long-suppressed demons head-on. The child's voice filled the air as she screamed, "You decide. Leave or be lost forever," but before I could reply, the shadows surged with blinding speed, pulling me toward the chasm, and in those heart-stopping moments, I felt something sharp and cold pierce my heart. Pain, raw and visceral, erupted as the dark tendrils wrapped around me like a vice, locking me in a vice-like embrace. I gasped, feeling the air draining from my lungs, wrenching away my very soul as I was dragged toward that eternal night. And in those final moments, a whisper echoed against the fading light, a chilling promise, "It never ends." And then, as the darkness consumed me completely, I saw not just despair but a glimpse of another and all too familiar face breaking through the veil of shadows, eyes wide with impending horror, reaching for me. "I'm sorry," they called, but the dark swallowed all sound. When the void closed over me, the air disintegrated into wailing sirens, howls of the damned that coalesced into a grueling symphony of hopelessness. Sharp jags of icy fingers clawed at my skin, extracting the warmth, replacing it with paralyzing dread. I fell, sinking into that abyss, an endless descent into madness where the silence thundered. Yet, just as I thought I would succumb entirely, I was jolted back into clarity. A blinding flash illuminated the darkness, revealing a broken reality filled with grotesque forms swirling like a tempest. Fragments of light danced amidst the shadows, forming indecipherable images of past and present, dragging me between realms. As I blinked away the disorientation, I found myself standing in a dilapidated room, dust hanging like a heavy shroud in the beams of muted sunlight trying to penetrate the wrinkled curtains. A vanity mirror, cracked and clouded, reflected not just my pale face but the shadows lurking just beyond. Seething with anticipation, in the periphery of my vision, I caught movement, a silent figure watching from the corner, cloaked in black. I turned sharply, my heart racing, only to find an empty space echoing with an unsettling stillness. Sweat trickled down my spine. Something was still here, crawling beneath the layers of dust, waiting. "Leave me alone." I shouted into the quiet, my voice trembling as it ricocheted against the peeling walls. But the reverberation was met with unsettling laughter, a low growl weaving through the corridors of my mind, anchoring me to this nightmare. "You cannot escape what you have summoned," it whispered, a tone coated in malice. Before I could fathom its implication, a sloppily scribbled note slipped from the crevice between the creaking floorboards, fluttering like a phantom insect. I reached for it, compelled by something I couldn't name. The paper bore the remnants of ink, the letters smeared as if written in blood. "It knows you, and it wants you back." An icy dread coiled around my heart as that ethereal urgency I had sensed before surged anew. I was being watched not just by the specters I sought to escape but by something ancient, a malevolent force that toyed with my existence. I could feel it rising, its presence was a storm brewing beneath the placid surface. Frantically, I tore myself from the note's grip and turned to leave, but as I swung open the door, I was struck with blinding fear. The hallway stretched infinitely, lined with doors that each held echoes of despair, the soft whimpering of lost souls pleading for release, visages of agony flickering like ragged film. An overwhelming dread washed over me. I could not remember how I had arrived, but I knew I was imprisoned again. Suddenly, the walls began to pulse, each throb resonating with a heartbeat that mirrored my own. Dark figures emerged from the walls, their silhouettes flickering like dying candles, beckoning me to join them within the madness they knew all too well. "You are ours," they cried in a chorus of lamentations, pulling at the very fabric of my being, as if trying to wade through my memories. Just when I thought the pressure encompassing me was unbearable, the child's voice crowed through the dissonance, "You cannot surrender to them. Remember who you are." But doubt splintered my resolve like fragile glass. In that very moment, I stumbled backward, colliding into a mirror that had not been there before, a shimmering portal reflecting not my face, but the visage of the familiar figure from the darkness. Their expression was torn between desperation and fear. "Please." "You must." A blinding light erupted from the mirror's surface, forcing me to shield my eyes as fragmented images swirled like a cyclone. The child, the tortured souls, the crushing despair I carried. I felt as if I was suspended in time, a dark puppet dangling over a chasm that beckoned with unspeakable horrors. Then, through the chaos, I heard Sabinga's heart-wrenching wail that twisted my insides, almost unearthing buried emotions. "You have to remember," the figure called to me again, their voice now fragmented by the winds of torment clawing at my sanity. "Who are you?" I cried out, desperation tinged with sorrow wrapping around my words. I felt the pull of the abyss again, the yearning for connection, to grasp what was lost. "Trust me," they shouted, a plea carried by winds of memory as their face morphed with anguish and hope. "You are my only chance at freedom." And then the darkness surged once more, drawing me closer to the edge as shadows writhed with ravenous need. The other figures, the lost souls, began to scream, their cries merging into a cacophony that threatened to drown out all else. Suddenly, a voice bellowed from somewhere deeper within that chaotic void, chilling my veins. "You belong to us, and you will never escape. The choice is taken from you." The child's spirit appeared beside me once more desperate than before, reaching out, warning. "You have to decide now. His chains bind us all." In a final moment of clarity, I realized there were no more choices. The tendrils tightened like iron bands, and the figure in the mirror stared directly into my soul. Tears streamed down their face, a reflection of the truth I had evaded for far too long. "Choose or be lost forever." Before I could muster a reply, the mirror shattered, sinking into the darkness that yawned wide before me, and all fell silent, consumed by an endless void. The last thing I heard was the echoing cry of the child, drowning beneath the weight of the shadows once more. "Please save us." Then, everything collapsed into a deathly quiet. The oppressive silence was only a prelude, thick and suffocating, binding me within its grasp as I stood amidst the ruins of the shattered mirror. I still felt untethered, as if the ground beneath me had been torn away, leaving me dangling above a void of uncertainty. Then, like a whisper in the dark, the air turned heavy with meaning, a sinister weight vibrating beneath the floorboards. The space around me began to shift, the walls undulated, pulsating with an energy that felt both alive and hungry. I closed my eyes, desperate to anchor myself to something human, but that only amplified the images racing through my mind, raving specters hunched over in agony, shadows flickering like candles on the verge of extinction, and that desperate, familiar voice that still called out to me from the recesses of my memory. "Please save us." It echoed relentlessly, a haunting refrain taunting me, reminding me of a bond one could not yet grasp. A chill slithered down my spine as my eyes flitted open. The rune had transformed. The curtains were stripped away, exposing a wall of infinite blackness that swirled and writhed, cycling through imprints of lost souls trapped in timeless torment. The floor beneath me felt cold and wet, like a grave that had been freshly dug, inviting in my every step. Then, the first scream ripped through the silence, a soul wrenched from its resting place, desperate. I spun around, searching for the source. My breath quickened at the sight of shadows uncoiling like sinister smoke, curling into grotesque forms that effaced the very air I struggled to breathe. "Leave," I pleaded, but the words died before they could escape my choked throat. The shadows only twisted closer, malice written into their uncaring gauzes. From within that chaos, a figure began to emerge draped in gauzy misery, eyes hollow yet luminous. It reached out with distorted hands, longing to bridge the chasm. "You know me. I am part of you. You summoned us here. Now you must answer." Sudden memories crashed against the shores of my mind like relentless waves. The soft laughter of a child, the warmth of sunlight, the echo of a life I had nearly forgotten. An urgency clawed at my chest. They were not enemies but echoes of what I had once been. The demonic presence I felt was a reflection of my own anguish, a manifestation of the regrets I had carried too long. "Remember," it cried, a desperate mantra that reverberated through the room. "Before it consumes you." All around, the shadows writhed in anticipation, swirling like a mass of restless spirits, their demonic eyes, vacant yet piercing, fixated upon me as they demanded my choice. A malevolent riddle echoed around me. "What will you sacrifice?" I turned to the figure before me, their features surging from the fog of memory. "Who are you?" I begged, my heart pounding, an avalanche of horror cascading through me as recognition dawned. "I don't want," but before I could finish, the entity shook its head, a tortured expression unmistakably human warping its shadowy visage. "You cannot shun it for much longer. Time is not on your side." Suddenly, the room began to tremble violently, like the world itself was unraveling at the seams. The figure inched closer, its face close enough for me to catch a glimpse of fear and determination contorting its features, a jarring reminder of all I had to lose. "You must face it," it insisted, the shadows around it beginning to engulf its form. "Or everything you love will perish forever." The walls were closing in on me, crushing thoughts and possibilities beneath their relentless pressure. The cries grew louder, a crescendo of desperate wails tearing through the fabric of the moment, almost as if the souls imprisoned here had recognized the choice I was burdened to make. And then, just as all hope seemed to fragment into despair, I glimpsed through the madness the child's face flickering through familiar shadows, a serene expression hiding the horror buried beneath. "You can still turn back," they implored with an intensity that made me shudder, but before I could refute, the shadows surged forth, dragging the figure down into the depths of their despair, its scream swallowed by the wrathful roar around us. "Save us!" I heard once more, this time echoed in the voices of countless souls, drowning me in an ocean of terrified cries that I had seen the choice lingering, a fragile thread leading toward an uncertain path, and the sweet relief of memory, now lost in the frenzy of chaos. "No!" I screamed, my voice cracking against the tide of oblivion that engulfed the room. "No, I will not choose," but the shadows laughed, a cacophony of mocking howls colliding with my heart, and I felt their grip tightening, as though the essence of my very being was being unspooled like a thread. The ground fell out beneath me, spiraling into an abyss as the frantic cries reached a fevered pitch. Then, amidst the cacophony, a new voice rose, low and sinister, resonating from the darkened corners. "There is always a price." I could barely hold on as the walls shimmered and darkened, collapsing into a vortex of agony from which I could no longer discern the way back. The last thing I saw was a solitary face, a long-lost connection begging desperately to be freed from its chains, realization kicking in like the midnight breeze pinching skin, awakening the horror I carried within, and then darkness engulfed me entirely. The invisible weight of silence pressed against my eardrums, a suffocating reminder of the dread that permeated this haunted, warped space. I floated in the void, suspended between terror and familiarity. A pulse echoed in the near distance, the steady thrum of something ancient stirring, something that had been disturbed. The darkness, thick and almost tangible, had a life of its own. It caressed my skin, whispering secrets soaked in despair, urging me to remember. The temperature plummeted, frost creeping into my bones like a malicious spirit intent on freezing me in place. Each shallow breath billowed out as a thin mist, rendering me instantly vulnerable, a mere shade amidst the horrors that swirled within this nightmarish realm. Suddenly, the ground beneath me shuddered, and a low growl resonated in the depths, vibrating through my core. I steadied myself, recognizing the sounds of creaking wood and broken whispers overlapping in a chaotic symphony of dread. "You are not alone," a voice rasped from the shadows, the tone a chilling mockery of comfort. I turned to face the darkness, squinting against the inexplicable gloom, and saw glimpses of movement, shadows flitting past me, just out of reach. I felt their eyes, they watched with an insatiable hunger as if sizing me up like prey. Faint shapes arose from the dark, twisting into nightmarish visages that played on the edge of recognition, yet eluded me, parodying the faces of those I once held dear. "Help us," a whisper curled around the room, a name I could feel scraping the walls of my consciousness. Tears stung my eyes, a mix of regret and a profound sense of loss weaving through me like poison. I stumbled forward, desperate to make sense of the phantoms that pushed and pulled within my mind, their cravings igniting a fear so primal it unsettled the very marrow of my bones. But even more unsettling was the pulse, that incessant beat emanating from somewhere above, throbbing alongside memories I couldn't hold on to, yet was compelled to pursue. A figure emerged, shrouded in shadows with a face that slipped from clarity like water through my fingers. Fleetingly, they wore a semblance of pain, drenched in sorrow, soaked in the echoes of forgotten laughter. Another whisper molded from the figure's lips, but it morphed into a hideous grin that spread across its face, legs bending at unnatural angles, shuffling closer. "Are you ready to join us?" it hissed, the warmth of its breath brushing against my throat, damp and foul. The chill enveloping me tightened, constricting as if aware of my pulse accelerating, the fear swirling around my heart. "No." I gasped, forced back, my world narrowing into that pitch-black void. The walls felt alive, writhing and pulsating as though imagined horrors were clawing from within. My thoughts spiraled, was this hell? Could I ever escape? My thoughts seized when I caught sight of the pleadings of those tortured souls coalescing momentarily within the shimmering dark face emerging among the writhing shadows that chilled me to my core. An innocent face, bright under the shade of despair, it was the child from my memories, vivid yet jarring. "You cannot forget me," it implored, desperate and pained, fading once again into obscurity. As panic surged through me, a new sound resonated, sharp and haunting, a cry that seized my heart with a grip of icy fingers. From far beyond the shadows, something foul and grating began to advance, each slither unveiling a grotesque truth. "The price is your sanity," it whispered as I sensed a presence lurking behind me, a vast figure cloaked in perpetual darkness. The face of endless malice warped into view, a distended grin reflecting nothing but malevolence. I felt compelled to flee, my legs urged into motion, pulling against the shadows that snared my ankles. I dashed toward the remnants of memory, but the chilling laughter echoed behind me, every footfall seemed amplified, mocking my desperation. In the midst of my flight, I caught a glimpse of mirrored agony reflecting back at me, millions of faces twisted in torment, mouths agape in screams that drowned me in despair. Each phantom recognized me for what I truly was, part of the darkness that fed on their pain. With every ounce of my being, I pushed forward, heart racing, echoing against the wall of terror that sought to bury me within its grasp. But around the corner, I halted, breath caught as a shadow obscured the flickering light of hope, blocking my only escape. "Join us," it cooed, the faint semblance of a chorus behind it, luring me closer. And as I stood frozen, the shadow stretched out its arm, fingers curling enticingly, revealing a sharp glimmer, a shard of mirror reflecting my own terrified face, warped and twisted, but with something behind that visage, something unspeakable clawing to break free. Before I could move, the ground erupted, a chasm yawning beneath my feet, a swirling void of chaos and terror that beckoned me deeper, into the darkness where I could hear nothing but the distant cries of lost souls echoing, imploring, pleading, while the shadows closed in around me with a promise that my fate had already been sealed. And then I fell. The descent felt endless, air rushed past me, cold and biting, as fragments of my life spiraled amidst the chaos. I grasped at the void, willing it to halt, to let me catch my breath, yet it only pulled me deeper into its embrace, like the grasp of an indifferent monster. The cries of the lost intensified, a cacophony that forked into 1,000 agonized whispers, clawing at the fringes of my sanity. Suddenly, the darkness gave way as I collapsed onto a damp, cold floor, hard and unyielding beneath me. Stunned, I lay still, consciousness flickering in and out, fighting to rise above the overwhelming blanket of despair crushing me. Gradually, I opened my eyes, greeted by starlight breaking through the shadows. It was a scorched, barren landscape devoid of life, ash crunching underfoot, with only shattered remnants of trees reaching like skeletal fingers toward the sky. A haze hovered at the edges, swirling around my legs, curling with malicious intent. In my chest, urgency pulsed like a festering wound. I needed to escape. I climbed to my knees and scanned the horizon, only to spot the faint outlines of figures moving against the smoldering backdrop, a grotesque silhouette of what once could have been humanity. They were drawn toward me, mouthless forms, their eyes glistened like black obsidian, reflecting an emptiness deeper than any pit I'd ever encountered. The first stepped closer, and the rest followed, creating a wall of wretchedness intent on closing in. "You, too, were a chosen one," it rasped, voice slinking around the air like a twisted serpent. My heart raced as I staggered backward, grappling for words that wouldn't come. There was a familiarity to their features. I blinked, straining against the fog of fear clouding my vision, then recoiled as recognition struck. These were the faces of those I had loved, now hollowed and distorted by an unfathomable anguish. "Help us," they chorused, voices layered like echoes of the past, a haunting reminder of their despair woven with my own grief. The words tore through me, igniting a flame of anguish that threatened to consume me whole. "Please," I croaked, palms pressed against the unyielding ground. "What happened to you?" "Everything you touch withers," another voice chimed, echoing through the hollow expanse, and my heart stuttered at the accusation. Each breath felt like a strike against my chest, the pall of loss sinking in with a malicious glee as if the shadows were feeding off my torment. "Everything you forget becomes prey to the shadows." The ground trembled again, diffusing with the weight of their words, and behind them, a silhouette emerged from the dark, chuckling deeply, ominously. It towered, a monstrosity bound in swirling blackness, its eyes glinting with malice and hunger. It bore no human resemblance and yet felt intimately familiar, the embodiment of everything I had ever feared. "No!" I screamed, scrambling to regain my footing, but the figures gripped my arms, their cold hands anchoring me in place. They belonged to this nightmare I needed to escape. "You can't have me." One of the figures leaned closer, its face flickering like flame, flashes of memory flickering in and out of focus. A mother, a brother, friends whose laughter had once cascaded around me like music. "You wish to forget," it whispered, every syllable dripping with betrayal. "Now, we are forever bound." The ground quaked violently, fissures yawning open, offering glimpses of hell itself, a swirling maelstrom of misery and regret. I tore myself free, fueled by a raw, primal instinct to survive. As I bolted towards a distant silhouette that shimmered with hazy light, the shadows coiled around me like vipers, pulling me into a murky thicket. I could hear the howls crescendo behind as if the very landscape howled in fury, but then I felt it cold fingers brushing against my neck, sending icy tendrils trailing over my skin, an intimate invitation to surrender. I gasped, forcing myself forward, desperate for freedom. Yet, as I dashed toward the light, a glimmer of hope flickering on the horizon, a chilling laughter filled the air, echoing through the barren expanse. "Escape is an illusion," the shadows intoned, their chorus growing louder, enveloping me in a cacophony of despair. "You are already ours." As I lunged into the fleeting illumination, shadows surged around me, barreling toward me with a speed that stole the breath from my lungs. The brilliant light shimmered for a heartbeat before giving way, mechanical gears grinding against each other, twisting my reality anew. And then, all at once, I was enveloped in darkness once again, a crushing silence wrapping around me like a shroud. I looked around, heart racing, and realized I was standing in an empty room, still haunted by cold shadows. At the center, I found a mirror, cracked and dilapidated, a reflection mocking me with an empty gaze. Slowly, a voice emerged from behind me, dripping with remorse. "You left me," it whispered, the voice a chilling echo that sent shivers of recognition coursing through my spine. I turned, dread pooling in my stomach, as I was met with a figure cloaked in darkness but unmistakably familiar, a ghost of my past, a specter resurrected from the ashes of my regrets. And just as I opened my mouth to scream, the mirror shattered, sending shards raining down like shards of the truth, and in the lingering silence, I felt the souls around me stir, the shadows closing in, hungry for my next choice. The chilling quiet left in the wake of the shattered mirror hung around me like a fog, thickening each passing moment as I found myself frozen in place once more. My heart drummed in erratic rhythm against my chest as I processed what little clarity I could muster amidst the swirling chaos, a reflection not just of the fragility of the glass, but of my own crumbling spirit. I had let them down, all of them, me loved ones, the innocent lost to the shadows I summoned unwittingly. "Why?" the specter asked, stepping closer, the light from the cracks of the mirror spilling across its features. It was a visage I knew all too well, burnt by the memories of what I had once taken for granted. "Why did you turn away?" Its voice was an embrace and a curse, comforting, yet laced with pain that delicately knotted around my heart like a vengeful serpent. I stammered, but the words slipped away, crushed beneath the significance of my failed choices. It felt like every wasted moment echoed back at me, taunting like a cursed dirge. I had chosen neglect over love, fear over connection. Around us, shadows stirred, eager to manifest, encroaching with an insatiable hunger. "No!" I shouted, my voice breaking through the haze, driven by a desperate will to shatter the generational cycles of regret that clung to me like a second skin. This isn't where it ends, you cannot choose what has already been chosen for you, the spectre replied, the plea in its tone haunting painful echoes of sincerity. And with those words, realization struck like splintering glass. Those spirits surrounding me, those once familiar faces twisted into grotesque manifestations, had not just lost their lives, they were echoes of my own despair. Born from choices that cast shadows too deep to measure, but then I saw it, what rippled beneath the surface of the darkness. Something unyielding, a flicker of light where the shadows swirled. It was the portal, the illusory escape I had yearned for all along. Euphoria surged in my chest like an icy fire. Could this be a way out? Do you still wish to abandon us? The spectre asked, clawing at my heart with its glimmering eyes. What have you done to save us? Its single-minded focus pierced through the weight of my regret, a reminder that my choices wrought irreversible consequences on those who had once believed in me. Desperation clawed at me, the shadows pulling tighter as if sensing my fleeting hope. I turned, ready to take the leap toward the shimmering light, when the spectre's hand shot forward, gripping my wrist with an impossibly cold strength, pulling me back. Choose. You can leave, but they will remain. Their pain is your pain now. That I end that single heartbeat, clarity broke through the fog. I saw if darkness was an extension of my own insecurities, my unfairness, my guilt festering in hidden corners of my psyche. The lives I had let slip away, each caught in this loop of vengeance, were desperate cries for acknowledgement, for closure, for forgiveness that I had denied them. As I stood there, agonized between two worlds, shadows yanking at my being, grotesque faces pleading, I summoned the courage I thought I'd lost. No. You will not keep me. I turned, sprinting toward the portal, the glimmering light widening as if responding to my defiance. I stretched my hands out, hoping to claim that salvation, to recognize the freedom I'd yearned for all along. And just as I crossed the threshold, the darkness surged behind, howling with rage, desperate for my essence, but I would not be their prisoner any longer. The light enveloped me entirely, and as I stepped through, I grasped the truth that shattered the very foundation of my existence. Eternal darkness could only thrive where I allowed regret and guilt to fester. Yet, as the light numbed the edges of my body, a voice echoed from the shadows, taunting and grave, you escape, but it never truly ends. You will return, as we always do. I tumbled into the blinding brightness, but the chilling laughter echoed behind me, resonating with a finality that froze my blood. Near the entrance of the fading darkness, the faces of the lost watched, their expressions flickering between sorrow and vengeful hunger. And in that final moment, as the brilliance enveloped me, I understood the irrevocable price of my new freedom. The burden of memory would forever weigh on my soul, as the shadows lingered patiently, waiting for the day I wasn't strong enough to resist their call. The light faded, and I gasped as I was thrust back into my empty room, the familiar air thick with shadows. My heart pounded as the weight of realization sank in the darkness beyond. The door still beckoned, still called to me, and with a chill running down my spine, I knew, everyone I had lost would always be waiting. Help us, join us, whispering ever closer, a symphony of despair, ever hungry. In that moment, I braced myself for the inevitable return, because I carried their shadows now, and soon enough, I would learn that true horror, after all, is not a door you can simply close.